Hi, everybody. Thanks for being with me on a Friday. Somebody said Friday. I love that. I'm going to remember that. I am definitely a lively person. I want you to drop questions in the chat. I'm going to save time for questions because this is going to get you to reframe how we are addressing the behavior in kids. We are actually going to change parenting by putting the nervous system first. So I'm going to jump in. I've got slides and I am here to answer any questions, like I said, in the end. And feel free to, hold on one second. Feel free to, ask a question. Okay, Gail, my sharing is disabled.
Now, let me see what happened here.
Yep. Bear with us.
How's that?
There we go. There we go. Okay. We're off. Here we are. So, we're really going to start talking about how to listen to the nervous system. And when we think about kids' behavior, I you to think a bit about it not as defiance, as really communication. So, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about me. So, I'm a licensed therapist, a certified school psychologist. I am a best-selling author. I have another book coming out in September. And hopefully, I'll be back in person to this conference, wherever it is next year. And I have a top parenting podcast called Dysregulated Kids. We've got enough. And I'm a mom of neurodivergent kids. I've been practicing for 3 decades. And I have always worked with neurodivergent kids. I work with everybody now. And this is a parenting book for everybody. This is not just for neurodivergent brains. And right out of the gate, I saw that traditional things, right, medications and talk therapy just wasn't working. And so I went to the research, and all of my work is based on natural solutions, including parenting, because parenting is the most powerful things parents can do. And really, this isn't just about parenting, this is about how we support kids, right? So we're going to really start reframing behavior and start looking at it as communication. And we're going to talk about what are those signs? What does dysregulation look like? What are the under and overstimulated patterns? We're going to talk about co-regulation. You're going to hear about my comms method because it's easy and it's part of my regulation first parenting. And then what are practical tools? And I want to share some case studies with you. And again, I want to hear questions, engage, ask away anything that you can. So let's talk about the reality of parenting today. So this is from the U.S. Surgeon General and the Stress in America survey in 2024. So 48% of parents report feeling overwhelmed on most days. And 41% of parents are so overwhelmed that they're essentially immobilized by the overwhelm. Neurodivergent kids bring 2 times the amount of stress into a family. The divorce rate jumps to over 80%. And neurodivergent kids, which are increasing, have a 10x increase in anxiety, depression, OCD, other clinical diagnoses, right? And what's happening to parents and teachers, right? People work with kids, say nothing is working. We've tried everything, but these meltdowns, these behaviors keep happening. For any of you that are working with kids, do you hear that all the time? Right? Give me a yes, give me a no. Because that is really what it is. And just FYI, I work in a clinical center in Connecticut, my own center, and I am retiring next year so that I can have a more global impact and change parenting because we have to counter this overwhelmed and we have to get kids regulated. So let's talk about our mental health crisis, right? So 1 in 5 kids have a diagnosable mental health or a learning disorder. 14% of all adolescents globally have a diagnosis, right? Diagnoses have surged by 40% in the last decade. The uh, 2007 to 2017 suicide rates, oh, you got a thumb up there, sorry, have uh, increased dramatically. And all of these things, everything's climbing. Anxiety, depression, and behavioral struggles are now the leading cause of school referrals. And traditional discipline just is not really happening. And for all of these kids affected by mental health, with kids with diagnosed mental health conditions, only 50% get help. We are the greatest country in the world, and that is a travesty. Okay. We're not prioritizing, and some of these diagnoses are accurate, and I believe diagnoses are buckets of understanding, but we have to really give practical tools, and we have to start looking at what are the behaviors, what are the things that we can address, because a label clearly isn't doing anything if 50% of kids aren't getting help, right? So what happens, right? So what do adults often see about kids, right? So we see defiance. Oh, they're deliberately doing this, right? They're being disrespectful. They won't listen to authority, right? They're being disruptive. Oh, their brother didn't do this. There's other kids in the class didn't do this, right? And when it comes to what's really happening is that behavior is communication. Patricia, your screen is on. If we could get you to turn that off, that would be great. Perky, thank you. Sorry to call you out. Thanks for listening. And so when we start seeing those behaviors, right, we start to say, it's a signal to overwhelm. It's a signal to this is a kid that's got an understimulated nervous system. What unmet needs are there, right? So Amy's saying we got to figure out what the underlying needs are, right? And that's a whole, onion of things, right? But when we just break it down to the nervous system, we can provide safety and regulation, and it's accessible, and everybody can do it. And every single person who works with a dysregulated adult or child can teach these skills, and it costs nothing. The things that I'm going to talk about, right? So I do use a lot of fancy brain tools, but they're not needed when we practice in the micro moments, right? So when we are looking at these behaviors, right, this is what we have to look at, because words don't always match what people are telling us, but the nervous system doesn't lie, right? So we have to start looking at that. So we have to start rethinking behavior. And again, it's a voice of the nervous system. It's not random. They're not one offs. What's going on? What's the underlying cause, right? So that old lens, right, doesn't serve us anymore. That choosing, they don't care. They're unmotivated. Something's wrong with this kid. They have ADHD. How about they have oppositional defiant disorder, right? That's like the diagnosis du jour. We're also hearing about ADHD. And again, I'm not saying none of these things aren't real, but what are we doing in advance to help support people even with a struggle? So we now need a new lens. What's the communication? What is the nervous system telling us? And how can we help kids regulate in the real world? And how can we help parents do this in everyday parenting, right? So we shift judgment and we move to pathways that really help kids regulate, because without regulation, no learning's going to occur, attention's not going to happen, and connection's not going to happen. It is the blocker. This is biology. This is what happens in a dysregulated nervous system. The nervous system is stuck on alert, and it's not going to allow any of those things to happen. And here we are. Everybody who works with kids sees a lot of dysregulated kids, right? I'm the mother of dysregulated kids that look very different, right? So, just a quick reflection. This is a poll of some sorts, but I want you to think for a minute, right? So, when you see challenging behavior, what is your first instinct, right? Why are they being disrespectful? I wonder what's going on. Can I stop this behavior right now? Or do I pause and regulate my first self first? And you can share this in the chat. You can hold on to this, but we are often taught to just stop this behavior and not really think about what's the root cause, right? What's happening, right? And my podcast isn't called Dysregulated Kids, and my book has the word dysregulated in it. I'm not allowed to release it yet. But that's not happening out of nowhere. That's happening because it's everywhere. And we're seeing that a lot. And adults are experiencing it equally as much as kids, right? So let's talk a little bit more about the communication, right? Because again, every example serves a purpose. And, kids, when something feels too big or too scary, when emotions overwhelm their capacity, when their cup is full. I often talk about the nervous system and what happens to kids, right? How stress builds as you have a cup, right? We only have one cup. And over time, there are things that can either drop into that cup or come out of that cup. But your nervous system doesn't have an unlimited capacity. So what are we doing to help that nervous system feel safe, right? Are we, putting in routine and structure? Are we regulating ourselves before we approach our children, whatever child that you're working with or you're a parent, right? Because everybody's here. And do they have the right developmental tools? Because a lot of times people assume somebody's academically bright or they seem capable in this area, and they actually have the skills to manage stress. And those are things that develop over time, right? So, when we start thinking about, right, we have these kids that are very, quote unquote, defiant, right? I hate you. Who's a parent who hasn't heard that? Because you know what? You're not doing a good job if you don't get that once in a while. But sometimes families are stuck in this level of term I coined called co-dysregulation, where it's a reactivity cycle. And this certainly occurs more in families with generational trauma, but it's occurring in lots of families now. In families where, you know, you don't have huge amount of what are perceived stressors. There's not financial stressors, not educational stressors in the same way that you think of. But yet the hum of the world, there's a lot of dysregulated kids and families and individuals, and there's a lot of stimulation, and the brain isn't getting a break, and it overfills that cup. So even kids who have these great environments can dysregulate, and it's perplexing for a lot of families, and I'm seeing this a lot. I don't know if anybody else is seeing it, but I am seeing it a lot. And when we think about, kids that are common things people struggle with, homework. For me, one of the most common things I see is restrictive eating. What are some of the behaviors that you're seeing from the family, either in your own family or children that you're supporting? Would love to hear because I feel that there are transitions. Oh yeah, that's actually one of my most popular podcasts. And button pushing. That's my other one that's a cop. So we have to get kids to better understand and, validate but not rescue. They need skills to manage stress because stress doesn't go away and stress teaches us, right? So what happens in our stress response nervous system? And the autonomic nervous system manages our stress, right? So for people that don't know the ANS, I talk about the ANS like she's my best friend, right? So, and I work hard to keep her in the rest and digest parasympathetic state. I was working with somebody last night. I was so glad. I said, "Oh, have you ever heard of the stress response system?" He's like, "Do you mean rest and digest?" And I was so grateful that he had a sense of it. And so when I explained why he was experiencing anxiety, OCD, depression, he was like, "I got it. We got to regulate." And I was like, "Yes." So, using these words, not just understanding them for yourself, but using them with families and kids are really helpful. So, our autonomic nervous system manages stress. And when we are distressed, it's supposed to go to sympathetic dominant, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And then the stressor goes down and you go back into this nice parasympathetic state. But instead, we're seeing people that cup getting too full and they're circulating in a sympathetic dominant state, and then what happens is the frontal lobes go offline, so you're in a warrior state. Where is the perceived stressor, right? And everything is going to cause reactivity, right? And so then These are the things that you're seeing: fight, aggression, defiance, flight, running away, shutting down, fawn, people pleasing, which can be perceived as a great thing because these are often successful, and freeze, right? Selective mutism. And again, this does not have to be just for trauma. This came out of the trauma world, a lot of this understanding, which is awesome. Um, but this is where we have to help kids and families understand the nervous system so they can say, okay, my cup is too full. What can I do to take some of this coffee out or whatever liquid is it? Water. I got to get myself regulated. So when I like to talk a lot about not just overstimulation, but understimulation, right? So the brain is underfired, right? We see daydreaming. We see kids that, don't listen. They're listening on a 3 to 5 second delay, right? They are procrastinators. They're tired easily. They have difficulty not just starting tasks, but completing tasks, and definitely have troubles with transition. These are often kids with diagnoses of ADHD, learning disabilities, different types of processing issues. It can even be anxiety, right? And we don't have to have a diagnosis associated. These are just behavioral signs. These are clues, right, of what the nervous system needs and how we can start to regulate. So that brain on fire, we never ignore these kids, right? These are the kids that, the socks aren't right and they're punching a hole in the wall. They have huge emotional reactions. These are often, and both forms can cause, parents to be in a cycle of co-dysregulation, because the parent of a child who's understimulated gets really irritated at that kid for not doing things in a timely manner, or, oh, he's bright, or she's not this, but the brain on fire is, hyperactive, overloaded, irritated, racing thoughts. They're in your face. These are the kids that get the referrals in school. These are the kids that, you're getting an IEP in kindergarten. And these are the kids that parents seek help for. And they may not get the right help. They may, feel like, well, what's the thing we can do, right? I was trained. I'm having my last graduate intern. And because of me, and because she was the only student in her graduate program who was getting any holistic training, they have now added an elective course. But 30 plus years after me getting trained, still not doing it, right? We're not teaching people. And holistic can mean a lot of things. It doesn't have to mean, woo woo. It's science. I've always do it through science. And again, parenting is one of the greatest holistic tools that we have, and teaching about the nervous system. So, what are some of these root causes? There are a lot of root causes, right? So I love to talk about neuroinflammation. I could do an entire presentation on neuroinflammation. Give me a yes if you've ever heard of PANS, PANDAS, or autoimmune encephalopathy. Keep going. I want to see it. Okay. Has anybody here, like, who the heck is that? Even Patricia's raised her hand. Thank you, Patricia. So, um, and you, hey, Patricia, take your hand down so we'll take you off the screen. Thank you. So, neuroinflammation is one of the greatest threats to longevity, health, everything. I read something, I didn't see research on it. So, I love to talk about research. I get my research alerts every morning. I'm such a nerd. And but I was told recently, last week, that this generation now is the first generation that's not going to outlive their parents. And neuroinflammation is a big part of that. Oh, thank you for telling me you've never heard of that. Um, and so, what is neuroinflammation? How is it impacting us? And I'm going to tell you what PANS PANDAS in, because at PANS PANDAS and autoimmune encephalopathy, which is AE, I want you to know what it is. So, in the case of PANS and PANDAS, what happens is the immune system has a misdirected immune response to an infection or toxic trigger. So infections can be, PANDAS is strep, PANS PANDAS can be anything. COVID, Epstein-Barr, tick-borne illness, the flu, sinus infections, a list of other ones that I'm not, and then things like mold and lead and different heavy metals, right? And what happens is the brain basically says, what's going on here? It starts attacking itself and it creates a ton of neuroinflammation. And then that leads to a variety of psychiatric issues, right? It's a medical problem that causes psychiatric issues. And you can see OCD, you can see rage, you can see loss of skills, urinary frequency. There's a lot. Please learn about it. And that is just like the Cliff Notes version. But neuroinflammation, what regardless of the source, poor eating, 70% of American children are exclusively eating processed foods. It's terrible, right? And bad food, processed foods, creates inflammation. This is not rocket science. This is proven, right? Sedentary lifestyle. All of these things create inflammation, which creates a variety of autoimmune diseases, is leading to mental health issues. And pharma is very interested in neuroinflammation and is creating psychiatric drugs based on cutting inflammation. So, wherever pharma goes, they know, right? And so these are things that we can address primarily through lifestyle and nervous system regulation. So, what are other root causes? Compounded stress, right? That full cup, trauma, right? We, thanks to Bessel van der Kolk, I spoke with him like a week ago. We spoke at a conference together. And if anybody hasn't read The Body Keeps Score, please write that down. Everybody should read that. It changes your whole mindset. But trauma lives in the cells, right? The cells change every 7 years, but the ones that are impacted by trauma get passed down. We can stop that with nervous system regulation. We can change trauma patterns, sensory processing issues, and then autonomic. Oh, somebody's reading it now. Great, Amy. Dysfunction in the HPA axis, right? So our thalamus, pituitary, adrenal, our cortisol starts getting jacked up, right? All of these things that help support our regulated nervous system responses start creating emotional and behavioral reactivity, right? You go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And these factors, most people don't have one, they have multiple ones because stress leads to neuroinflammation. Sensory processing leads to stress, stress leads to, and creates all of these. So when I have this essentially a concierge clinic. And again, I'm retiring next year. And um, and before that book comes out in September. And I had to switch to a 6-month program because it was so complex and it was so layered. Lacey, I can't say my book title yet. I'm not allowed to. So it has to be a big reveal soon. Oh, Bessel van der Kolk. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Look at me. I thought it was about me, Lacey. It's not about me. It's about Bessel. He's amazing. Please read it. And if you ever listen to him speak, he's awesome, but he drops the F bomb more than a truck driver, just FYI. I'd like to warn people. So let's talk about after school restraint collapse. Has anybody heard of this term? Yes. Oh, I do genetic testing as part of my program. It's an awesome thing. Yes, genetic variants should be on there, and it's also part of that. So after school restraint collapse is basically this phenomenon where we kids hold it together all day and fall apart when they get home. And then parents are like, what's going on? Is this on purpose? Why is this happening? And there's a lot of conflict, right? That happens. And, schools wondering, what is this bad parent doing? And the school parent is like, what is this school doing to my kid? And really, this is about that cup, right? So they're masking, and this is very common with neurodivergent kids, right? They're working super hard to regulate, to learn, to do all the right things. And then as soon as they get home, it's conflict, it's co-dysregulation, it's aggression, it's a hot mess, right? And it's a depleted nervous system that feels safe enough to release. And, this is something that happens to a lot of families. And we want to make sure that we are giving the right kinds of support and communicating with school about this. And obviously, it is a clear sign that their cup is too full and we have to go back and figure out what it is, right? So, one of the biggest things I think everybody here has heard of co regulation, right? And, what is it? What does it look like in the real world? I talk about it all the time on my podcast. It's a huge part about my book, but it is truly the most impactful thing that a parent can do, and they don't know that how impactful it is, nor do they know how to do it. But it's this biological process where what we are doing, not as much as what we're saying, even though tone matters more than what's coming out of our mouth, it's triggering that child's nervous system. So we can set the tone of chaos, or we can set the tone of calm. We also can set the tone of fun, and we can set the tone in other things. You don't you know when your kid's about to dysregulate and go into the red, right? Once a child is in the red, that frontal lobe goes offline. They're in the sympathetic dominant. There's not much you can do but be a calm presence. But what happens? What's the science of co regulation? Why is it so powerful? One, the mirror neurons. So, as soon as your child is interacting with you, right? And I think you could see this even in yourself, right? You have a buddy. My best friend Shelly lives in Australia. I miss her desperately. When I met her, I said, that woman says what's in my head. I've been looking for her my whole life and literally became best friends, and I love her. And I could just think about her and I know we're going to have fun, right? Our nervous systems align and it's just something so great. She feels like home to me. Like she's the sister I always wanted. And when we are regulated, it becomes that emotional anchor and your child's nervous system will attune to it. Even when they are dysregulated and it's in a classroom or whatever is going on, that movement, right, of calm, the face, the tone, just the soft body language slowing down will actually start to reset them. And your emotions are a contagion, right? Your calm is contagious. So is that dysregulation, right? Children pick up on our internal state. No words have to be exchanged. That's the power. So parents can feel very overwhelmed by this. Teachers can feel very overwhelmed by this, but it's just incredibly powerful. And when we give parents the understanding plus how to actually do this, we are helping them create, signal, right? Polyvagal theory, signaling safety to the child, right? Just by what we are not saying, but how we are carrying ourselves, right? If a child allows, touch, on the arm or just being there and having a soft face. Some people are very neutral in their face, and that's confusing, particularly to a neurodivergent child. So you can't give what you don't have. Don't approach a child dysregulated, right? Pause, get out of there, just be quiet for a minute. You don't have to go in, right? This is what we have to teach our, people who work with kids, parents. We don't have to go in and rescue and relieve. We just need to be an anchor and calm. And that's a lot easier. You don't have to have words, right? And I think that creates a space for people to do that. And that's what I've been teaching people for 30 years, right? So, this is what a dysregulated adult looks like, right? That right before we got on, I talk about my kids all the time in my podcast and stuff like that, and in my book. Right before we got on, my youngest started as a freshman, and he's got an A in this class, right? And the teacher wrote, "Could do better, could talk more in class." And I was like, "He got an A in there," Like, eh, your words matter in what you say things. I just think it's pretty funny. The guy's actually really nice to him. I don't know how you can motivate somebody when you already have an A, but whatever. Um, and it's the first time taking religion too. So, your rapid breathing, you're clenching your teeth, your shoulders are up here, right? And you're using reactive language, right? You're focusing on control and you're thinking about disrespect. You're doing all of those things. They're doing it on purpose. I mean, I used to go in and consult in schools, and what people would say to me, I'd be like, this is how it is. Okay. I need you to reframe. I need you to be the regulated adult, and I need you to see this behavior not as purposeful, but as a clue, right? So regulated adults, right? There you have a relaxed posture, the warm tone, right? And they're using language like, I see you're struggling. That happens sometimes. Let's see what we can do. Instead of you can't do that again, you know? Obviously safety when somebody is doing something unsafe, we do have to, use firmer tones, but that's not what's happening most of the time, right? We focus on nervous system regulation as the adult and teaching those skills, right? So practical anchors, tone of voice, breath control. People resist breath work. It is the most powerful thing you can possibly do. And it's free and it's easy. Now, there are some people that can't do that. Guess what? There's lots of other somatic practices that are free and easy too. And body language. These are the three anchors that help kids more than anything, right? The next level is when a kid is starting to co regulate and going into the yellow, that's co regulation. Then your words can start moving things. But if they're in the red, forget it. This is what you can do, right? It's really important to understand that. So we have to calm the brain first. This is the core of my regulation first parenting. You when you calm the brain, when you regulate, then you can connect, then you can correct, then you can teach. Everything else is a waste of time. And what I love about this and why I've been doing this for so long is it really empowers both of them. It gets rid of the shame, right? And it's practical and it's directive. Do you know what the number one thing that determines the success of therapy is? Anybody want to put that in the chat? People used to think it was a therapeutic relationship. It's actually the client's perceived value that they learned a skill. That's what determines the success of therapy. So when we give practical tools like regulating, what's going to happen? They're going to feel their nervous system feel better. Wow, what's that? Right. And then they're going to have moments of success because they're going to be able to connect, they're going to be able to learn. Right. And can only teach skills from a regulated state. There is nothing that's going to stick. And it goes beyond that. Treatments don't work the same. All my pandas kids, they're great therapies, medical treatments. The body doesn't allow healing. It's called psychoimmunology. So we're in this situation, right, where everybody is so heightened. But other than Netflix, and alcohol for adults and marijuana usage, what are people doing? Like, what are the healthy ways, right? You have to make lifestyle changes and breath work and moments of 2 minutes or less to reset your nervous system is what happens. And when we move away from this discipline punishment model, we create lasting change from the inside out because the nervous system is what is going to make or break it, right? It's not the words. They can't hear you, right? The words matter when you're regulated. So very important. So this is where we get into practical, right? So, traditional stuff, I always use homework because it seems to be such a big point. Like I said, and some of you shared transition, eating, just straight old disrespect, not listening, and problems getting kids to focus in general. Those tend to be like my top things, regardless of age, um, ethnicity, religion, everything. Those tend to be like our top issues, right? With picky eating really moving up there, people really struggle to get their kids to eat healthy, and I have a whole lot to say on about that. But this is a common situation people have, right? This bickering over the homework. Just do it. Stop fighting with me, right? But when we back up, right, what I teach people is that, oh, I see this is hard right now. Now, what if we took a step before you even started homework, right? And we reset that routine right before homework and the night before? What if they put in an extra 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of some type of calm down routine? Because we can't expect somebody whose cup is full to add more in it. We can't, right? So we have to have those nervous systems that are really built for problem solving, right? So this is my comms method, really, really simplify. I'm trying to make things either easy. And I will be certifying individuals, practitioners, and organizations in this, but again, we got to co-regulate ourselves first, right? You have to have that oxygen mask, right? Before you can help any child, regardless of who you are, whether you are a daycare worker or you're the parent or you're the therapist, you got to regulate, right? And we can't personalize a kid's behavior. And that really holds people back. You know, the number one way we learn to parent is from our parents. And I talk about my mom and dad all the time, Tony and Philomena, and they taught me some good things. They taught me some not so good things. Favor the male, these kinds of things. And, so one child literally was better than another in our family, and we were told that. But yet we were told we can do anything. So it's all right. I believed I can do anything. But I'm not passing that on. I made a conscious choice not to do that. So what are we doing that we are going to change, right? And that looking for root causes, right? Instead, when you are regulated and you're not seeing that as a direct you're doing this on purpose, you're able to say, well, let me get my detective hat on and really look for root causes. And this is one of the most powerful things I've ever seen for parents. When we get the first two and they start going, now I get it, Dr. Rowe. Now I can see how this blow up he was having was really about that right out of the gate in the morning, we should be doing, a trampoline to reset the nervous system, right? And then we as parents have to model coping strategies. And that's really just in everyday life, when you make a mistake, you have to say to your kids or the person you're working with, well, isn't that, I just did this. I should have done this. And I really get those metacognitive strategies going and really getting kids to say, it's okay to make a mistake and I can figure it out. And I don't have to fall apart on it. And, I know that I always did this for my kids because my oldest kid really was prone to dysregulation. And I had already been working with kids for a long time before I had kids. And what was amazing is he did internalize it, but his younger brother just got it. There was no instruction because he was always hearing it and was such a good problem solver and, stress inoculated, like could see a stressor and say, I don't like this and this is what I'm going to do about it. Or I have to do it and this is what is going to be because stress is a learning opportunity. When we're in constant stress, all it is a derailer. Oh, somebody said blowing bubbles. I love that. And then support and reinforce. So a person with a clinical diagnosis or with neurodivergence takes 3 times as long to learn something, okay? And it takes 34 times doing something to learn it at an innate level. So, somebody who's under distress would, take 100 times people. So this is part of that frustration that people who work with kids that are dysregulated and parents who have kids with dysregulation is that we need more reinforcement than people think. And reinforcement isn't good job. It's really breaking down like, oh, I loved how you took care of that and problem solved that. What was different this time? And really getting them to start think differently. But this is just a simple framework that captures it so that we can, teach people in a way that sticks and helps to understand. And, this is that after school, part, right? So what happens when this Maya walks in the door, right? And it's conflict, right? So number one, her mother's not going to dread it. Her father or her grandmother isn't going to dread it. They're going to breathe first, right? And approach her with calm, right? And start using calm, hopefully together, right? And then think about what she needs, right? What is that behavior telling me? Oh, this is different than before. Did something happen? And don't start acting like it's the Spanish Inquisition when we have kids, right? And of course, right, we can't personalize it, which is why she can look at root causes. And then what can we do that a parent can regulate, right? Oh, I can see you're having a hard day. I'm going to sit with you until your big feelings come out, or this will pass, you know? And, or maybe saying nothing at all. I always say zip it and just being a calm presence, right? And then this is where you get specific of the reinforcement. Oh, I see you held it together all day and it was a good day. What was different about today? And you're only really having deep conversations when kids are in the green, right? So they've co regulated with you. They're moving into a place where conversation can happen. If you're trying to have these deep conversations when kids are in yellow or red, it's just not physiologically possible and just feeds the co dysregulation cycle. These are just some of the interventions that I like to bring up. I'm not saying these are feasible, but I want people to know about ways to regulate the nervous system. Has anybody ever heard of biofeedback, neurofeedback, HRV, heart math, PEMF therapy? Great. I don't know if anybody uses these in their clinical practice. I should have that as a separate question. And these are just tools that I have used for decades. And they're not always needed, but sometimes our kids are so dysregulated. The young man who I saw yesterday, has spent he's 24. He's been dysregulating on and off for, geez Louise, like 12 years, and tried everything you can think of. So now we're in a place where we're going to use direct tools to get him back on track. Not always needed, but things like HRV, heart math, is not expensive. And, I've had kids, parents buy it for a classroom, and they're great interventions, but they need to be used. But I only mention them because I really do want people to think outside of the medication box, particularly with our people with neuroinflammation. These psychiatric medications build inflammation. So they might work initially and then they stop working. So we need to help our families understand different tools. So I love environmental tools. I spend a lot of time helping people shift lifestyle, right? When one person is dysregulating in a family, you can take the attitude is, this is terrible, or you can say lotuses grow in mud and this is my opportunity to be a lotus, and that this is going to help make change for everybody that's going to be positive. So I am a huge fan of supplements like magnesium, omegas, B vitamins, different things. Somebody did mention epigenetic changes. These things are really affecting how nutrients and food are happening. And I do epigenetic testing when people are in my program. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but we are getting increased variance. And we know in autism, we don't have the exact variance, but what we do know is that the more they have, the more they work against you, right? So, and what Amy is talking about is MTHFR in the thread. It's just a very common genetic variant where it impacts your ability. You lack an enzyme to properly process the B vitamins, which is necessary for your nervous system to work. So, food. Food is a huge thing. It is a platform, it is a foundational element. The number one most researched diet, anybody? Feel free in the chat. It's a Mediterranean diet. So any anti-inflammatory diet is going to positively impact mental health. Mediterranean diet is the most researched. There are changes. We eat whole foods, right? Protein, fat, and really not eat processed junk, which, whole foods are much more, readily available. Chipotle sells foods that are, whole foods. There all these bowl restaurants that are everywhere, all over the place. And I know there are food deserts, right? But fat and protein regulate the nervous system. Those are my best things. Now, I want people to eat a ton of veggies, but if you can't do that, I need you to have fat and protein. It regulates blood sugar. It stops the dysregulation. It helps your brain be more focused. You're cutting inflammation. And then one of the greatest things that has happened in crises to us is the lack of exercise and movement. There is research that shows that 30-minute moderate periods of exercise for 30 minutes reduces ADHD symptoms by 40%. 40% of American adults are completely sedentary. So we are not detoxifying. This is impacting our hormones and all this stuff in sleep. Sleep is essential and, it's required. 90% of brain detoxification occurs in sleep, and then device dysregulation. Kids, adults, everybody is just spending too much time on a device, and we do not have that. Yes, Amy, thank you. Hydration. We don't we need to power down to power up. You need time away from your device. It Devices are here. I love my devices, but we need times away from it. These become, when we integrate and we educate about this nutrition, most people are like, why is magnesium so important? Guess what? Is the number one most used nutrient in the body. 3 to 600 chemical processes require it as a cofactor. Do people know that? Is that surprising to people? And you're going to just blow through it when you're stressed. You need a lot of it. Everybody go and get magnesium. L-threonate is the number one best one, crosses the blood-brain barrier. So let's put this together, and I want to have time to answer questions. We have to calm the brain. Lots of ways, somatic exercises, you can use brain tools, breath work. And then we have to support the system by optimized nutrition, movement, environmental changes, right? And then we have to connect, right? From this regulated state, we can pay attention, we can learn, we can accept hugs, and we can really only teach emotional and social skills, behavioral skills, when a nervous system is calm and regulated. It's just not going to get in there. And this is why people go to therapy and say it didn't work, because therapy is great for a regulated person, you know? And so why are we expecting something different, right? And, you know, I love to talk about case studies, and I also want you to know where's my magic wand? I can't, oh, so I always have a magic wand on my desk. This is not magic wand stuff. You have to do the work, but it's about shifting, and it can be hard for people to shift. But when we break it down, we make it easy. And, this is just a case study of somebody who had daily meltdowns. And, basically what happened is taught co-regulation, taught the comms. He did do neurofeedback. This was a severe case, but within 8 weeks, we saw dramatic changes, and nothing was working for this kid. So his brain started to feel safe, right? So what are the challenges, right, as a professional? I would love to hear people's um things that they feel are challenges that you are facing, parents are facing, right? Staying calm yourself, having consistent tools, right? Seeing beyond the behavior. I find that to be one of the greatest challenges, the parents' personalized behavior, and getting buy-in. Feel free to drop in the chat what you feel like are some of the challenges that you face in supporting that, right? And what if 30 years have taught me, right? They taught me a lot. My parents and my kids that I've worked with and my own children have taught me a lot. So, different labels, same root cause, dysregulated nervous system. Got to regulate first. And, you know, one approach of regulating first has many wins, because when we regulate the nervous system, everything else can work. And I don't believe in only one way of changing behavior, right? And there's not just one way to regulate the nervous system. We have to teach people to do micro resets to move forward, for sure, and make things different. So I'm not going to go into every case study, but behavior is communication, under and overstimulation or clues, co-regulation before correction, and comms is your framework. And tell parents and yourself as a practitioner, nobody has to be perfect. We just have to, every time that a child regulates, it is rewiring the nervous system, and it's teaching it to stay regulated, to stay in that parasympathetic state. And the more that happens, the more a child becomes resilient, because they're going to learn those skills, right? And that's so important. I have a page, but here's ways to learn more by my newsletter. I have a podcast, and I am I hope this got you thinking. Feel free to scan this or go to Dr. Roseann Comm's guide. And what I am talking about today is there. So you go to drroseann.com/comms guide. And I just want to say thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I work at a domestic and sexual violence agency. And I don't really know how to phrase this, but what suggestions do you have when there's trauma and triggering involved, along with, that dysregulation from whatever else is going on.
Yeah. I have, hold on one second. I just lost you there for a second. I have a lot of experience in trauma. I actually provided support to 9/11 survivors, and I actually was one of the 9 approved Sandy Hook survivor treaters. There were only 9 of us who were approved. And so, but over all these 3 decades, of course, I have lots of trauma experience. And I actually keep in contact with a lot of the people I worked with, which is awesome. And they love to tell me what they're doing. And it's such a privilege to have served people. But one of the greatest things that I have done, and I just implore people to do, is teach them about the brain and the nervous system. And as simple as a way, like, here's your nervous system. I literally, get out a sticky note. I go, here's the autonomic, and I make an eye on here, and I'm like, here's parasympathetic, here's sympathetic, and you're here and you're jacked up, and this is what it looks like. And they're like, oh, yes. So you have to start with education, and then you have to give the most digestible, easy things. I mean, that's what I'm doing in my book, just FYI. And it's gonna be like 1895. It's not gonna break the bank. And I have a podcast that's free and talk about this twice a week. But we have to break it down and then almost give a menu. Here are 5 things that reset the nervous system in 2 minutes or less. Let's make a plan. Let's do it every day for 7 days. Can you do a group on it? Can you do a 7-day challenge? Like, what can you do to make people committed that's easy? You know? That is so important, because I literally am like as nerdy gets. Like, I can't even tell you how many research studies I could pull out in my head. My mother, Philomena, had a contextual memory like Mary Lou Henner, and I have a little bit of it. I don't even have like a 10% of what she had. You got to give people what they can do, right? And meet them where they're at. The moment they're overwhelmed, they're
Here
choking.
we have to eat 2 different meals. Please put something here.
So my name of my podcast is called Dysregulated Kids. If you just search Dr. Roseann, like, you can be in China and it will come up. Is that helpful for you, Lisa? Or a validation? I
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is there something more specific? But honestly, 5 quick
So you want
things
to put the drinks in there.
And I
and make
know
them
I'm
and
not in my personal office currently, but if I was,
yeah,
you would see my walls not covered, but kind
yeah.
of I have like coping mechanisms, something similar to that I hand out to I'm also a
And the
shelter
missing
advocate, so I'll
ingredient is
hand out to them.
accountability. That's the missing ingredient. How can you get them to actually commit to doing it? So, can your agency do a whole 7-day challenge for every single person? Why not? And get everybody involved, because it's harder today since the pandemic to get people to come to groups and things like that. I don't know if anybody feels like that, and virtual is nice, but wouldn't this been amazing if we were in person? Next year. So that hopefully that's helpful. What other, Amy, you have a question for me?
Um, the problem I'm having is the parents, either because of generational issues, traumas, you know, they're not at a point to where they're open to discussing, let's find out what the underlying need is, instead of saying, I'm going to take this away because you're having a behavior.
Yeah.
Because like with my son, it worked very well. He was in Special Olympics. So he knew that was one thing that would never get taken away. Every week he had a Special Olympics training practice, whatever. So he had something to look forward to.
But
You
no
know,
amount of punishment is going to get a kid to regulate.
no.
And
But
I mean, this is why I want up doing a podcast, right? And it's a big deal podcast. Like, there, tens of thousands of people listen to every episode. People need to hear it and hear it and hear it and hear it again. And I come from science, but love. I marry the heart with the science so that it's digestible. Keep giving information. And the great part about regulate first, we don't really have to know what the problem is. And everybody can regulate no matter what the source of dysregulation is. Later you figure it out. But if we teach people to regulate, they can come from a place where maybe they can make a change. But you're against a brick wall if you're not teaching them to regulate, you know? That's right, Jill. It
I
started with
did
that.
a sneaky, I like printed out all the tools that I did with my son and put them in a packet and told her to just peruse as you like. If you have any questions, reach out, and it has opened some conversation.
Yeah.
I
I do
don't want,
feel, and I think literature is great. And, feel free. You can give your people my podcast or find an episode. There's something about listening and seeing that
Mhm.
changes people. I got my readers, I clearly write in a book, but people need to hear it and they need to hear it they need to hear it over and over. And
right,
it's so much harder when you have generational trauma. I mean, I'm a therapist. Like there are a lot of people with unresolved issues trying to be therapists and have no business being a therapist at all. Like that's one of the most frightening things in my whole career is other therapists who, back in the day you had to do therapy when you were becoming a therapist. So
right,
we all got our stuff. It's what we do with it. And them being in front of you makes they want change. Even if they're I call it Bruce Banner and the Hulk. They're about to try to turn in the Hulk. If we make it easy and they start regulating, that's the only way change is going to happen. And we need generational shifts. I mean, now we're getting dysregulated kids without trauma. It's a hot
right.
mess in America. We're the greatest country in the world, as I said. But we need to make some things. So somebody's asking about somatic exercises. There are a lot of things we can do, right? When you're doing it together with your kid, I don't care if they're 17 or 3 or 27, because I consider 27-year-olds are a failure to launch. We have to start integrating them, make them small. So somatic exercises, could just be a heart hug. Most people don't resist that. It could be butterfly tapping. I'm a big fan of EFT tapping. There are ways to disrupt. If you can't do that, you can just hum. You can get up and swing. It disrupts the body and shifts things. So, for sure. So, I hope this was helpful. I hope you really got something practical, but I also hope you really, really got your mind thinking differently and think about your own child or every child you work with who's stuck and now reframe it and think, how can I help them regulate?